Let's get back onto foreign policy issues now. I want to talk first about Canada now joining the push to recognise a sovereign state of Palestine. Here's their Prime Minister, Mark Carney.
Canada intends to recognise the state of Palestine at the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly. Canada will increase its efforts in supporting strong democratic governance in Palestine and the contributions of its people to a more peaceful and hopeful future.
Well, let's go to Munich in Germany and catch up with former Foreign Minister Alexander Downer. Thanks for joining us again, Alexander. Canada full throttle on recognition. UK through Keir Starmer are almost there. And Anthony Albanese and his treasurer are saying basically it's a matter of when, not if. Tell us what all this is going to achieve.
Well, it will achieve absolutely nothing. At least Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, to his credit, lays down one condition, which is that the Palestinian territory should be governed and not governed by Hamas, whereas at the moment Gaza is governed by Hamas, as we all know, and the West Bank is so-called governed by the Palestinian Authority, by Fatah. And so these two hate each other. So there's no immediate prospect of any sensible governance taking over that territory. But as you said in your introduction a few minutes ago, attempts have been made for years, for decades, to create a two-state solution, to create a Palestinian state. And the people who've rejected it are not the Israelis, but the Palestinians. Let's just remember that. The Palestinians have always rejected the proposals for a two-state solution on the grounds that they're not satisfied with the boundaries, that they don't want to live. I mean, ultimately, they don't want to live side by side with Israel. So this sort of rush to recognition is the worst kind of weak virtue signalling by feckless Western politicians, rather than people who are genuinely trying to solve this problem, which can only be solved through a total restructuring of the democratic processes in the Palestinian territories.
Let me just get you to pick apart one point you made there, because I think it's very important. We're seeing a lot of politicians, Anthony Albanese included, saying a precondition for this state would be that Hamas would not be involved. Now, there's a problem there because you've got to get rid of Hamas first out of Gaza before you can say they're not going to be involved. But it's a glib line, really, in many ways, because you can say Hamas is not going to be involved, but this is an Islamist extremist group with links back to the Muslim Brotherhood. These are shape-shifting organisations. What you really need is to keep out that sort of Islamist extremist ideology from any governance in the Palestinian territories, and that's almost impossible to guarantee.
Very, very difficult to do. I noticed the other day the Arab leaders also coming out unanimously agreeing that Hamas needs to be expelled from Gaza, from the governance of Gaza. So every effort should be made to do that. And that should be the focus of international diplomacy and international comments. I mean, I agree that a ceasefire would be good, but why won't Hamas agree to a ceasefire? Why won't they release the hostages? Why won't they allow a restructuring of the governance in Gaza? And until Hamas start to have pressure applied to them, not just by the Israeli military, but by the international community, as compared to the other way around, the international community always putting pressure on Israel, you'll never solve this problem.
Well, isn't that the real horror here? The counterproductive aspect is that the more pressure people put on Israel and talk about a Palestinian state, the more likely it is that Hamas is going to stick to its existing strategy and hang on to those hostages.
Exactly. And the more, what the international community is starting to do now, what Western powers like France, Canada, the UK, and so on are doing now is empowering Hamas by taking the Hamas line that Israel is not providing sufficient food, Israel is too violent, and so on, taking the Hamas line and encouraging Hamas to double down on their strategy. Instead of doing the exact reverse. The pressure shouldn't be on the Israelis. The pressure should be on Hamas. Release the hostages, stop the fighting, allow food to be properly distributed, which they're not allowing, and move towards a more democratic system of governance in Gaza and including the West Bank. That's where the international community should be going, and that's where the pressure should be applied. And the Arabs working with the Western countries to do that. But no, they're doing the exact reverse. They're attacking Israel, criticizing Israel, using Hamas propaganda to attack Israel, and thereby just empowering Hamas all the more and encouraging Hamas all the more. And honestly, it is complete madness, which is driven by domestic political game playing.
Such a tragedy. I want to change topics, though, briefly. Why don't you take a break for a minute there in Munich while I show everybody the new promotion of a special television event we're going to have here on Sky News next week. Have a look.
The global order is under pressure, and Australia is on the front line of a new strategic era.
We need a defence force.
The most complex strategic circumstances has demanded the biggest reassessment of our strategic posture in 35 years.
The world is shifting faster and more dangerously than we've seen in decades.
The strikes were a spectacular military success.
From Beijing to Tehran, Moscow to Washington, power is being tested and alliances are being redrawn. Join Chris Ullman as he and a panel of Australia's leading defence and security minds go inside the thinking that will shape Australia's defence future. The War Cabinet premieres 7:30 p.m. Monday, August 11 on Sky News Australia.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. It's going to be hosted by Chris Ullman. Alexander Downer, Australia's longest-serving foreign minister, is going to be part of that panel. Now, it's going to be fascinating. You, of course, have sat around the National Cabinet and National Security Committee of Cabinet for more than a decade through wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, crises in our region, dealing with issues such as defence procurement in the face of Chinese military build-ups and all the rest of it. So you bring enormous experience to this program. Tell me, in a nutshell, though, now, if you were sitting around there as Foreign Minister now in the Australian Cabinet room, how worried would you be about our strategic circumstances?
Well, I think we need to understand what's happening in the world. China, in particular, Iran, North Korea, and Russia, those countries are all working together in different ways to undermine liberal democracy and the global capitalist system. We have to work with our allies, with like-minded countries, obviously, above all with the Americans, to counterbalance that coalition of adversaries. And at the moment, Australia is not very good at that. Australia is becoming surprisingly isolationist, which is not the Australian tradition. Whereas the Americans, who are, President Trump accused of being an isolationist, is far from it and has been very forward-leaning in his approach to, in particular to Iran, but also to China and Russia. Not very successful with Russia so far, but it reminds us that we've all got to consolidate and work together, and that includes increasing our defence effort. Our defence force is hollowed out, so we need to start finding ways of increasing the strength of our defence force.